Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Libson, a teacher and socialist here in Oakland. We are online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, and turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode or jot down our information wherever you found this episode. And as you can see, today there's no Kenny, there's no Eduardo, there's no Hema, but there is my friend Jake, or known by everyone else, I suppose, as John Klyczek. So he's joining us today. We're going to have, I hope, an interesting discussion. First, welcome, John, or Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
And for folks who don't know, John Klyczek is the author of Schoolward Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education. It's the book that I read that I got to know Jake by, and he's a frequent contributor to Unlimited Hangout. Are there other publications you're a more frequent contributor to right now?
No, and I was going to say we might not want to include the word frequent in front of my contributions to Unlimited Hangout anymore. At this point, I've averaged one a year for the last 2 years. I mean, I've been doing other things. I contributed to that book back. But anyways, it's just when you saw it, I was like, oh, I thought about this next article that's still not done. It's like almost done, but there's an interview I'm supposed to conduct with Constance Cumbie.
Then we'll just put you are an infrequent contributor to Unlimited Hangout.
Yeah, that
works. Well, it's more special if it happens less often. Anyway, it's sad to not have Eduardo here and Kenny here, which we intended. They have reasons for not being here today, which I probably can't get into right now. But I'm actually, Jake, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. You and I have talked a lot one-on-one on the phone. We've met in person, but as we noted here, it's never just been you and me doing one of these episodes. So I'm kind of excited to do it today.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yeah. And what we're talking about is I think on our previous phone call prior to the last episode you recorded with us, you had mentioned some interesting thoughts about what you see coming in this upcoming election, the 2024 election, regarding Trump, possibly regarding Biden as well, but really talking more about the Trump. I believe what you see as an upcoming Trump presidency and election. And you also saw those things connected to ideas and thoughts you have about all these wars going on. And I think there's other stuff as well. And so I really wanted you to share those. I don't think you went into detail with me when we talked, but I really was hoping you'd share your thoughts with those of us on What's Left. And we would just talk about that and really compare where we agree or where we disagree. But mostly I want people to hear what you're thinking about this, because I feel like you do a lot of deep thinking about what the hell's going on in the world. And even if we might use a slightly different lens, I always find it really helpful to see how you're putting things together. And I think it's be helpful for other people as well.
All right. Well, you know how much I love to pontificate and speculate on the public record. So I'll be happy to share all my half-baked ideas with you. But no, I do think, however, even if however accurate any of these sort of estimates turn out to be, I don't think any of them will be totally will in retrospect in the future, I don't think will sound ridiculous, even if some of them are off point, so.
Right. I think it's more about just understanding how people put things together, and some of the facts that people do have, because the same set of facts can be put together in a number of ways. And so that's what we're doing here a little bit. Let me ask you, before we get into 2024, I think this question will be meaningful. So just and this might be a big question that I shouldn't get into. When you consider the 2016 Trump election, I thought of that as an election in which the establishment wanted Hillary Clinton and Trump was the surprise candidate. They pulled him in pretty quickly, but his election was a surprise to the establishment. Is that the framework you have for 2016?
I sort of entertained that for early on in the early phases of his campaign and presidency, first term. First term, you know what I'm saying? It's like he's already got a second term, but first campaign for running for first term. But it didn't take very long for me to not to question that, and then just watching how things played out with him. Uh, I think he was the perfect guy for those 4 years, and for 2020 in particular.
Okay.
So uh, no, I don't really buy that anymore. That this he's like he can't, was this wild card that came out of nowhere, and
Okay. Then
I'm gonna be short as possible with my answers. You asked me if you want me to elaborate on any,
yeah,
anything
go
like that.
ahead and
I'm just gonna
say
pause so I don't rant. Yeah.
yeah. So go ahead and say, because I don't want to spend too much time. No, he wasn't. Because I'm basically saying, like, not that he was like, of course he's a member of the capitalist class, but they had rigged the thing against him, in my opinion, and even the rigging didn't work, and so they had to I'm saying after 2016 they had to rework things to get things back online, which they did through the course of it. But you're saying no, almost like he was part of the overall establishment plan. That's how I hear it, at least. And but so if I got it wrong, go ahead and maybe fill us in or fill me in on how you now see what happened in 2016.
I guess I kind of, how Barack Obama kind of, I mean, the phenomena are inverse, but I mean, are kind of similar in the sense that, this guy that was talking anti-war stuff from this left-wing perspective, like he was gonna basically undo all the Bush war stuff, and uh, what does he do? You know what I mean? Like he's the perfect. I think that in the way that Obama was a good uh, figurehead, or he represented the ethos of the Bush opposition and was able to galvanize that for a
Mhm.
certain amount of time. I think that Trump is the same phenomenon with sort of the new right, the sort of liberal, this new right that's sort of a blend of like your traditional conservatives, but also sort of these alt right types and like the libertarian types, and this the sort of this the people in conspiracy theory world that sort of overlaps with this sort of new age thing, like all this. I don't know how to describe it other than that, right? I
and
mean, that's a lot of
and a
different
lot of
categories that don't fit, but
right, and a
they
lot
just
of general populist anger that that existed there that could be consumed by or taken up by him.
yeah, exactly. And I think so. Right, the populist response to Obama, I think if you had to, if you just took it like a Venn diagram, all those groups, and you put them together, what's in the core of most of the overlaps is something that you could fit under a right wing political movement better than a left wing one. And Trump was the character to do that, in the same way that Obama was the character
Yeah.
to do the same thing with the left wing sort of response to the Bush era. That's what I think.
And let's go to 2020. Let's go to 2020 then. So for me, 2020 was, I would put it this way, and Trump and YouTube can suck it for well I care, but the Trump won the election in my opinion, and the election was taken from him overtly by the establishment. Um, I don't care about elections, so it doesn't mean like Trump wasn't going to do any better or any worse. Maybe he would have been a lesser evil in some people's mind, but in my opinion, 2020, the establishment then returned with a vengeance and made sure he was out, even though he had already been kind of like taken over by him. Like he didn't drain the swamp. He didn't, like you said, didn't do any of the things he said he was going to do, and more brought his base to heel than he did the establishment. Um, but they moved him out, and they gave us Biden. And so that's my look at 2020: is the establishment reasserted itself. What? How do you see 2020?
Well, I would speculate that in the same way that Trump was picked to be the figurehead to galvanize this populist sort of faux right wing movement, that the most important objective, other than like you said, bringing that base to heel, was J6. was to set up his base so that they could have a domestic terror law.
Right.
I mean, that's the most important thing. And so in that instance, I think that he's the perfect guy for lockdowns.
Right. So they could
I
basically
mean,
take the Patriot Act and make it for people here.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, the
And
okay.
we've well, and we've
But
talked. Look, I don't want to get all woo woo on this. I'm just noting the numbers, the numerology. All right, and when they do their 5 and 10 year plans, a lot of people do them with astrological and other numerological significance. And I think we talked about the 20 years from 9/11 to from 2001 to 2021. So it's 20 years from 2000. But you had a 21 event 201. Also, if he's elected again, he'll be the ninth. He'll be the 45th president, and he'll be the 49th president. 45th president. 4 plus 5 is 9. 4 plus 7 11. 9 11. I'm just saying. You know what I mean? It's. You know. I'm just.
and and for a person who doesn't like, I don't necessarily put things together that way, but let me try to see if I get it right. Because you talked to us when we talked about secret societies and things like that, and the connection between secret societies and a ruling class and an overall either a global plan that is being enacted. Um, you basically said, look, the reason these orders have a religious basis to them, some sort of religion that sees power in certain numbers, and so when these acts take place, they that's not by accident. The same order that is putting this stuff in place is choosing certain dates, certain times, because they feel it gives those events a greater power and almost a biblical power. But although it's not the Bible, I understand. But that's how I heard it when you mentioned it. So is that correct when you're talking about these things?
Yeah, and I'm not saying anything specifically about those dates or those. I'm just saying that it's interesting that you see a patterns of twos and ones and 20s between these two dates, and nines and 11s, 9/11, right? And that one is basically the culmination of the other, right? I mean, the domestic terror law it's just a domestic patriot. It's what we did on 9/11. We just brought it home. 20 years to the date from 2001 to 2021, right? And so, uh, yeah, like they would, what also is interesting too, if you notice that, this whole eclipse thing, so it made an X, right? The two eclipses, they made an X over the southern Illinois. Well, the first one was the previous one was the year that Trump entered office, and this one would be the year, or the after, right after he entered office, will be right before he enters office.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just,
Yep.
and if, like, let's just put it this way: if you were going to plan, if you had a 20-year game plan for terror law A and terror law B, and you were into that type of stuff, you might pick a number, or some pattern of numbers, and you might believe that somehow that gives you some kind of advantage.
Right. No, and
Whether it does or not, what I mean, whether it's coincidental or not, we just know that people do it, and
right,
it's interesting that these things are around it. That's all I can know. That's all I
right,
can
and it's connected to the idea of saying that these things are planned.
Yes, right. And remember also that, the other thing that came out of the whole 9/11 thing was, there was the anthrax attack.
Yeah.
And then out of that came, I believe it's called the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, which is when they started doing the pandemic drills that they drilled for 20 years. Right. So both of those things, right? It's a 20-year anniversary on both of those things, right?
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? So the more I show you another pattern, that well, right? Doesn't this like it's like okay, one pattern, okay, two, okay, three, and then when you start adding them up, and you know that there is a long tradition of these people in their secret societies, their fraternal orders that are into astrotheology and all that, like that. It's not just like, huh, that's a lot of patterns to be a coincidence. Like, yeah, but we also know that they're into like these types of patterns. Like, we're to the point at which statistical correlations, like, I don't think I'm that far
Right.
out there,
Right.
I'm not
I get
even,
it.
what I mean? Like,
Yep. No, it makes sense. I mean, again, like that's not necessarily my framework for looking at these things, but I do believe what you're saying makes sense from that framework. Like these dates are literally not coincidences, and they're literally an indication that there are forces who are putting this thing in play, human forces, trying to summon more spiritual or something else energies into their plans. Basically, this is how I hear it.
yeah, and let me say something else. I mean, if you look back on the whole Trump phenomenon, people were talking about making this guy president going back to when he was on Oprah.
Mm,
Was it the 80s or the 90s? Roger Stone talks about he was trying to talk him into being president for the longest time. Like, and what I'm saying here is that, so if we're talking about planning over time, like, oh, he just came out of nowhere. It's like, no, people literally, the guy that was probably one of the biggest, unofficially one of the biggest, stumpers for the whole Trump campaign, Roger Stone.
yeah.
Trying to get him into this process from the get go. So people were actively trying to get him into this thing for more than 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another indicator to me that he was just the perfect guy for the job. And look, he spent how much time in reality TV? So, faking basically, right? Like fake playing a real life part, right? And what was the other one? He was the original reality TV before that. You know,
Well, I know
the
The
fake,
Apprentice. He was in The
the
Apprentice, but I don't know
the
the.
WWE, man, the wrestling stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's not reality TV, but it's what's the term, kayfabe? Like it's
Yeah.
choreographed, right? But it's the performance is you're acting like it's real. So he also had practice. Whoops, whoops. We said this was in a better spot, but
He
it
didn't take
just
into account your hands.
uh, he had practice acting,
Yeah.
playing part,
Playing a part.
right?
Yeah. All right.
And
Let's.
look, they said that. Well, okay, go ahead. I
Yeah.
was just gonna say that was why they picked Reagan.
Right. Yeah. And one last question before we do the talk about what you see is going on here in 2024. Um, Now, we've had a lot of discussions with me and Eduardo and Kenny, I think even Hema, about voting or not voting. And like, I've definitely gone on record as like, I'm done with the voting thing. Like that the elections themselves are a part of manufacturing consent and shaping narratives for all of us, whether it's Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, Cornell West, to pick any candidate, even left wing Socialist Party candidates. In my opinion, are not even. It's just not worth getting into the electoral system at all because it's not our system. In the same way that the internet is not our system. Um, are you feel the same way? Because you said you voted in 2016. Where are you with regard to how you look at elections? That's my quick summary of my thoughts on it. What do you think about elections?
Well, I'm not voting this year, so I don't really know where I'm at. Uh, yeah, there's nobody that I'm super excited to get behind. Uh,
Yeah.
so um, yeah, it's simple as that, I
Yeah.
guess.
And just to be clear, I do believe in democracy. I just believe there's no democracy to be found in our democracy. I believe because I believe we live under capitalism, and I think it's no more true in the United States than it is in China and Russia. We all live in dictatorships. They're just a facade of democracy. So it's not that I don't. I think democracy is actually very important. I just think there's none to be found anywhere under capitalism, anywhere on the globe, except maybe in some indigenous culture that's hidden away in some place where people might kind of cooperate in a way that's more democratic. So that's where I'm coming from. Um, 2024. So if you asked me about 2024, I kind of go back and forth between, man, who do I think the establishment is behind? And I think before I talked to you, I was still thinking that they might be trying to hold on to Biden. But the minute you said to me, I think you said they're going to go with Trump, which I want you to talk more about, I have more and more become convinced that Trump is the guy to take them to the next stage. And Trump is the guy to help them really take the steps they need to take in both the war in Israel and the war in Ukraine, which I think for both of us is really one war, if you will, or it's part of one larger war. And I think he'll be the guy, like Obama was the guy to bring the left to heel. Trump will bring a populist opposition to heel and get them to endorse ruling class mandates in the way that Biden would not be able to. And so I am thinking that Trump is the guy this year, and he's going to win. I don't care if he wins. I think we have to fight whoever wins, but I think the establishment, I do believe, is backing him, despite all the stuff they talk about him trying to be put in prison or charged with 66 crimes, and the mainstream media basically saying, "Oh, we get him out." I lean very much in the direction that you're talking about. So I'll just say that, and then really let you talk about what have been your thinkings and thoughts about this election, and then why.
Well, as far as why I think he's going to win, one of the main things that's been pretty consistent is like the first time he was indicted. I don't even know how long this was. It had to be last year because I kept saying that they're going to drag this out. Either until the primaries are over or until the election's over. It looks like it's going to be till the election's over. Why? And then I said, and then the other thing what they do is every time they would come out with an indictment on him, there would be a new something about Hunter. Right. And so they're just doing this thing where they're just building up the tension on both sides so that each side goes, oh, look at Hunter, oh, look at Biden or Trump, right? And neither side acknowledging anything about their own side. So stoking. But then in the meantime, Trump's just looking like a martyr. He's he's being vindicated. And I've been saying it over and over again. And now there's like people are saying it on TV. Like I think Jimmy Dore had it clipped. I think it's like Frank Luntz or some Lutz or Luntz or somebody that was on some panel on MSNBC or CNN and said basically verbatim that like you're going to make him a martyr, you're going to make him the biggest comeback story or whatever. America loves an underdog and all that. And then in the meantime, so like I'll flip and watch like Fox, Newsmax, then you go CNN, MSNBC. But when you look at the left, MSNBC, CNN, like even they are throwing Biden under the bus, basically. I mean, they certainly have nothing good to say about him. Like when people bring up, critiques of him, they have, like now they don't even like try to lie for him. They pretty much just like, yeah, he's not doing, we don't really want him either, so they gave up on him.
So I think we're both agreed that it looks like they're setting up a Trump victory in 2024. And a lot of people who I know in the freedom movement, first of all, there's people in kind of former lefties, the Jimmy Dore types, who will be like, they're not necessarily going to vote for Trump, but they would see Trump as the lesser evil to Biden, is this warrior king who does a genocide and supports a genocide in Israel and has done all this censorship craziness and has just been a dictator, which I completely agree with. And they would say that whether they would vote for Trump or not, Trump is the lesser evil to Biden. And then there's folks in the freedom movement who are like, Trump is it's a good thing he's going to be in there. This time he's going to make more trouble, and or he might give us a way forward. He might get us out of Ukraine. He has said I could end that war in one day. There's a real enthusiasm for Trump. I'm not hearing that from you. Like you said, you voted for him in 2016. You might have wondered if maybe he was going to do something like that. I think what I heard from you when you said Trump's going to get elected, you're like, and we better watch out. That's what I remember you saying, and I don't think I heard more from about why. So, what if you think Trump's going to win? What do you think comes after that?
Well, um, well, the first thing is look, whichever one wins, which like I said, I'm pretty sure it's Trump. Um, you're gonna have to worry because it's the second term. And the second term is the one where you can't get elected a third time. So the second term is the one where they're always crazier than they were the first time. But the other thing is, okay, well, let me just as a side note, because we're probably going to go deeper and deeper in this direction, is that the other possibility that I still put on the put it it's still a possibility. The other thing that's still a possibility is that they make it look like he's this martyr, all of this. They make it look like he's obviously going to win, and then we have a scenario where he loses, and then we have his base, whether organically or by provocateur, do some J6 Part 2 event. Or if he gets in, then some of it revolves around this whole Christian nationalism thing
Mhm.
that's kind of getting a lot of attention now. And you can see an authoritarian regime. I know people think this sounds silly because, like, we've seen the whole everything woke be the main flavor of authoritarianism, but in the same way that woke, like, everybody was looking for like a swastika and jack boots and like, oh, that's what fascism looks like. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it looks like rainbows and unicorns, right? Right. And now you see this new thing, the woke thing, and you go like, oh no, authoritarianism is going to look like Christian nationalism. It's basically going to be fascism wrapped in a cross. Same type of cancel culture, but we'll just change the categories. We'll just flip them around, like something like that. And then I also think though that it somehow potentially he would ratchet stuff up in the Middle East, I think. Now this would conflict with the whole Christian nationalism base. Certainly the way that it's being, like you saw this recent thing with Christ is King is anti-Semitic. Did you see this thing?
Uh,
It was trending on Twitter, and then like I think this has something to do with that Candace Owens got kicked off of
yeah, we had an episode on that. Yeah,
I honestly don't know specifically what happened, but I know that I think she was also doing the Crisis King thing, and all this stuff kind of happened around the same time.
she
Uh,
she well, first of all, she was on. I don't want to go too far down this because we did this last week. Um, she was critical of what basically she was saying that Israel was perpetrating a genocide against the Palestinians, and secondly, there were people who were critical, who I think were Christian nationalists, and there was a Crisis King person who tweeted something critical of Israel that she liked, and then they kind of drew an equal sign between her and that guy and those forces, to then say, oh, you are now beyond the pale because clearly you are like one of these Christian, maybe Christian anti-Semites that even denies that the Holocaust happened, kind of thing like that. So that's what
right.
they did.
Yeah, and then you remind me, I forgot, and she was buddies with Kanye West, and he sort of pretty much got this whole thing rolling. I
Yeah.
mean, or at least in its contemporary discourse, right? Like
Yep.
at first it was him, then it was the Elon Musk versus the ADL thing. Now it's this thing, right? And remember, I told you, like, I remember I was talking on the phone, telling you that I seen this building up before October 7th. This discourse around public dialogue around anti-Semitism. So we get to October 7th. So now that discourse, right, basically envelops this conflict, and tied in with it is this notion of Christian nationalism. So Christ is King is not anti-Semitic. Uh, being a Christian isn't anti-Semitic. Being a nationalist isn't anti-Semitic. I don't even think necessarily being a Christian nationalist is anti-Semitic, or even necessarily entails that you have some Christian fascist ideas about how you would impose it. But there are provocateurs. I mean, there is an overlap between like the Nick Fuentes types. I believe he claims Catholic, but basically is more or less a white nationalist. So there are like Christian nationalists or people that claim Christian nationalism that are basically into like ethno nationalism. But What I'm saying is that by tying that discourse to the whole Israel thing, you basically, it's the same thing they do with Trump. If you're like Trump, that means you're a right winger. If you're a right winger, you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, you're a fascist. If you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, and go on down. And that's, but a lot of the people like Fuentes is still like all about Trump, right? A lot of the Christian nationalists they still think he's the guy. Funny
Right.
enough, like some of them, like Fuentes, will say stuff that is, pretty much anti-Semitic, and Trump is very friendly with Israel. So how does that work? How does that
Yeah.
work? Explain it to me.
So maybe you might need to, for me to go a little bit deeper into what Christian nationalism means. Is and what I hear then, what you're saying is you do believe Trump is likely to come in 2024, and with that, you believe you're going to get like the anti woke, but it's going to have the same effect. It's going from a different political side. There's going to be an imposition of thought, and basically saying you can only think within these parameters, not using you know PC or woke or what have you, but using this kind of Christian nationalist um, framework. That's what I hear you saying. I think. First of all, did I get that right? And secondly, what does it mean to be Christian nationalist? Does that mean like I've heard of like, oh, these uh, the Muslims who are really zealots want to impose Sharia law through government, things like that. Is that what we're talking about in the Christian form? People who want to use like Christian laws, but use the government to enact essentially a Christian ethos, so-called Christian ethos. But is that what we're talking about? I don't know.
Yeah, but I think it would look more like sort of like a new age kind of
Hmm.
Christianity, like it wouldn't actually be grounded in sound theology or doctrine in any way. It would be more like this vague kind of Christ consciousness thing, where basically it's for, yeah. I mean, I don't know what would be the value category. I mean, the reason why I was sort of laying out sort of some of the contradictions there is because I don't know how that would play out in terms of the war in the Middle East, or
Well,
like
can you
I see a lot of there's different there's other moving parts that.
right? Can you say more about because the thing I remember talking is like you were worried about what's coming. Can you tell me what concerns you about that being the kind of thing, that wave kind of rocking up, coming across the United States? What worries you about that? If I'm not, that might, yeah. Why would you be afraid of that?
Well, what is that? I mean, because there's a couple things on the table right now. Like, what exactly is that? Are we talking war? Are we talking domestically? Like, what do we?
Yeah, like, well, I think just to be clear, I think the framework for worrying about Trump was through the lens of Christian nationalism. And what what do you think that then brings? And you can talk about what it brings domestically and what it brings in terms of war, either one or both.
So let's simplify this. I think that Trump would likely flare things up in the Middle East. I think that he would ratchet if that conflict is still ongoing. I think he would kick it off,
Hmm.
and I think that because he always bragged about how he was Israel's greatest ally. He kept saying that he could make the peace deal. It would be the greatest deal of all time, right? Because he's all about making a deal. And he put the embassy in Jerusalem, and I believe Kushner was part of the Abraham Accords,
Hmm.
right? So he's been active out there, and if you want, everybody's like, oh, he didn't, he doesn't want to go to war with Russia. Yeah, but he's never said anything nice about Iran, right?
And
So
and to
they
be
dropped,
clear, and to be
yeah.
clear, he's the original. We got to take on China guy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that too. Right. I mean, that would be a proxy, but I'm just going right in that region. Look, when Israel's like Hamas this and the Houthis that, what do we always talk? What are we ultimately talking about? Iran. They're coming from Iran. Iran's funding them, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
that's always been. Look, remember the it's almost a cliche now. The Wesley Clark, the list of countries we're going to go to, and what's the last one's Iran,
Yeah.
right? So, and Trump assassinated dude, Soleimani.
Yep.
So, um, and he's
The
gonna be
the
off the
Iranian,
chain.
yeah, that is the Iranian general.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. Sorry, yeah. He's gonna be off the chain this time.
Yep.
So, I mean, those are the reasons why I think he would do that. He's very friendly with the Israel lobby, and has shown animus towards Iran, and he's friendly with that faction of our military. Um,
And
so he's so just in terms of that, he's set up to do that. Go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I agree with you. I believe he is perfectly set up to be the peace, if you will, the so-called peace candidate that will escalate the war, in that region. So I agree, and I think,
Okay.
um, and let's go over to Ukraine because
Well,
okay,
wait.
go ahead.
Let's stay there for a second, because there's another reason why I think that he would do that, and that has to do with his political base domestically here. So we've never really gotten into the Council for National Policy on this channel, but I've mentioned it to you. So people that don't know, it's basically the right wing version of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. It's basically, so it's, on this show we've talked about, or I have on this show many times, all the different roundtable organizations. I got a whole history of it in that book, blue book back there, Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty. But Trilateral Commission, CFR, Chatham House, Bilderberg, all these. Okay, in the 80s, we United States, the right, came up with sort of this. It was supposed to be like the right wing version of these roundtables, and it was supposed to be like being against them, supposedly, right? And Charlotte actually knew people that were in the CNP, and she had pointed out that the evidence that they're just a faux counter to the other roundtables, they fit right in with them, is that she had sent out she these flyers. Her and Rosalind Haley. Rosalind was a member of CNP. They sent out these flyers to get us, wanted to get them all to sign to get us out of the UN. He said only one person responded. She was like, okay. So, and if you look at their rosters, okay, there's a lot of people in there that, like Jack Kemp, okay, he was a Mason and and he's also CFR. All right. So, I mean, there's overlap between CNP and some of these other roundtables sometimes. But here's the thing, there's a heavy preponderance of Christians. Right. So, as the right wing version, their Council for National Policy is supposed to represent American national interests, but largely from a conservative base. And that meant it was a big Christian base. And so you had a lot of people like Tim LaHaye. Let me pull up my website or my database, make sure I'm not missing any of the names.
Hey, there's Mike Pence.
Yeah. Okay. Betsy DeVos, Donald Trump, Edwin Meese. Edwin Meese was, you'll see here. I don't know if you can see, but Edwin Meese was on Donald Trump's transition team or something like that, or
Yeah.
he advised him at some point. Okay. Notice this thing over here. It's connected to this thing. This is called the fellowship. Sometimes we call it the family. And it's like where they have this national prayer breakfast, and basically every president's been to it since, I don't know how far back it goes, but it goes back further than the CNP. Okay, and I don't want to go on a tangent, but that's this guy here that co-founded it, Paul Nathaniel Temple. Just as a side note here, Paul Nathaniel Temple has also set up the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and if you guys recall, this that's all the Barbara Marx Hubbard stuff. I'm not going to keep going down that tangent, right? But okay, Barbara Marx Hubbard, New Age, Gnostic, not Christian. All right, so I'm just showing. This is what I'm trying to say is this is the type of Christians that run the CNP and the family. All right,
And I'll link your former Barbara Marx Hubbard episode to this episode as well for people to check out what you're talking about.
okay. Oh, it's not in here. I thought I had it built into this. The John Templeton Foundation, another New Age family, but they're connected to the CNP. One of them's a member now, but Rushdoony. All right, R.J. Rushdoony was a proponent of this thing called dominionism. All right, and dominionism is basically this idea of they use a phrase. It's like it's God's kingdom on earth. Well, let's here. We'll just read Wikipedia's basic definition of dominionism or
Mm-hmm.
dominion. Right, the dominion theology, also known as dominionism, is a group of Christian political ideologies that seek to institute a nation governed by Christians and based on their understanding of biblical law, and so on. And there's all these different flavors of it, right? That's right. But the point I want you to get from this is in the first sentence here, right? This is sort of one of the flavors of Christianity or Christian theology that feeds into this idea of Christian nationalism, right? And this guy was one of these CNP folk, and another student of dominionism was Paul Weyrich. Paul Weyrich is the guy that set up the CNP. Okay, and look at what else he set up: the Heritage Foundation and the American Legislative Exchange Council. All right, and there's all kind of, if you want to just a little side note about my book, right? This is like at the core of a lot of the charter school legislation and stuff like that. And if you take a look at the CNP stuff, they have a charter school choice platform. Okay, but if I go back, sort of right tied to this dominionist theology is sometimes Christian Zionism, right? And that also ties into something called British Israelism. I don't want to put too much on the plate right now, but the way that this sort of fits in with some of the end times theologies that I was talking about has to do with this idea of, in the book of Revelation, Jesus comes back after the Jewish temple is rebuilt, the third temple. And so there are there's a lot of I don't have it. I got to build out my CNP database. Pretty sure it's Tim LaHaye. So Tim LaHaye is the guy that the Left Behind series or something like that. Yeah, the Left Behind series. Okay, I think I was thinking Hal Lindsey and the Late Great Planet Earth was another one of these books. Right, these are these end times books. The fancy term is eschatology, right? It's end times theology. So pretty much all of them, in some fashion or another, agree that at some point the interpret Revelation to be that at some point the Jewish temple will be rebuilt, and that the Antichrist will claim himself to be God in the temple. So some of the dominionists, they basically want to accelerate the end times, right? So they think that if you build the third temple, Jesus comes back. And then you have sort of this ultra-Orthodox that they believe that if they build the third temple, the Moshiach, right? It's just the Jewish term for Messiah, right? They don't recognize that Christ is the Messiah, that there will be a second coming. They think that the first coming hasn't happened yet, right? But you have these two factions. You have a conflict in the Middle East surrounding this area. You have a commander-in-chief who a large portion of his base are these Christians, some of them Christian Zionists, some of them like these accelerationists, that want to bring on the apocalypse, and all of that would fit into what all the all the New World Order theorists have been saying about World War III, and how one of the objectives of that would be to not just bring in a world government from upon the ashes, but you would have a world religion, like through this religious conflict, right? That you would be able to create some sort of new age, kind of like hodgepodge transhumanist religion where, you can't have any fundamentalist ideas about ultimate reality, God, and the transcendent, right? Like basically everything is determined by the social stability of the algorithm, kind of thing, something like that. So I don't know how well I kind of.
Well, let me try to summarize what I think you're saying, which is that behind a Trump victory are these forces represented in the Council for National Policy, which are connected to Christian nationalism, dominionism, the idea that we're going to bring Christian biblical law more into power, if you will. And again, I think, as I remember, you were comparing that to that kind of woke secularism that has been being forced on people in society, and now there's going to be a new force in response to that. That many people who've opposed some of the stuff that's in the woke stuff may embrace this new ideology, but in it, it's not just an ideology, is an idea that wants to use events like what's taking place in the Middle East to accelerate biblical events so that they can accelerate end times, so they can have Jesus return faster, if you will. That might be their idea. Whether or not you believe in Jesus or not, you're saying that these people in power do, and they will have a plan. And so that's one of the things that worries you about a Trump victory, because you see these sorts of forces start to become more in play, and we'll get a freer hand to do things, certainly in that region.
So I'm saying that all of those players are at the board, and those are the pieces they're playing with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And okay, so a couple things. So that I want to add. One is that I sort of showed you that Trump has ties to the CNP and the Israel lobby. There's an overlap between Dominionist and Christian Zionists, between sort of the CNP and the Israel lobby, and the nexus that sort of encompasses the Trump phenomenon, right? But then you also have like look at some of the memes. Look at some of the posts that Trump's done recently. It's hard to tell like if they're serious. Like, do they really think Trump is the Messiah? Like they some of the memes and the imagery and the symbolism, like maybe it's a joke, but like there was a coin. There's a coin in Israel that was coined that where it's got him and King Cyrus on the coin. King Cyrus, or Koresh, was the Persian king that brought him back from the exile in Babylon and let him rebuild the temple. That would be the second one. And he's the only other person that's referred to as Moshiach, or Messiah, in the Old Testament. Right? So you're putting Trump on a coin with a Cyrus. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, like, so and like people are playing around with that trope in the meantime. And then there's also this, like if we're just playing with the themes of Revelation, and let's say they're using it as like sort of a playbook.
Mm-hmm.
That narrative involves that at a certain point, the Antichrist would turn on Israel. So, right, there could be a situation in there where Trump kicks things off and then double crosses Israel somehow. I don't. The reason I put that up there, the reason why I'm putting that on the table right now is because what I laid out for you earlier is that as far as public discourse is concerned, they've framed it as sort of this dialectic, this thesis, antithesis, Christianity, Judaism with this Christ is king, and that surrounding the war. So if Trump's base is Christian nationalists who are being called anti-Semites, but he's also aligned with the Israel lobby, how does that play out? I don't know, but potentially it could be that he plays to one and then to the other, like he does with everything all the time. You know what I'm saying? And so that's I don't know how well I articulated that, but if they want to have the global holy war, he's the guy to do it,
Okay.
not Biden. And you can get, and by the way, so you'll get a large chunk of the Christian nationalist, dominionist types, the end times crazies that I'm talking about, even the ones that like maybe are anti-Semitic, but they don't care because if they rebuild the temple, Jesus comes back and they win anyway, right? And the reason why the war is important is because the third temple needs to be rebuilt where the second temple was built. That's where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. So in order to build the third Jewish temple, you're going to have to get rid of the Islamic presence on that site. So I don't think they're going to go without a fight. And, so the whole thing is by proxy bringing the West, the Christian West. And then and I think Trump's the guy for that.
Mm-hmm. And so, and let me just go back to the global war, global kind of war between Christianity and Judaism, I guess. That itself will be used. This not just the threat of the war, but even the enacting of the war, and maybe the millions that are potentially killed in such a thing, or hundreds of thousands, or many who will be killed, because I think you do see more deaths in the future through this. And whether Biden's elected and Trump's elected, I think there's going to be more killing. But I think what you told me before is that the war and the misery and crisis created by the war will then provide a solution to it, which is one world religion, one world government, so that that is the solution to nations being divided, religions being divided, and bringing us to the precipice of global annihilation. They'll provide the solution of here's a way out, but just follow us through this. Is that right?
I mean, that is one of that is the ultimate outcome
Yeah.
that I would
And,
foresee. That I would for. I mean, again, one
right.
more thing, and in line with that, by the way, I don't think that I doubt the sincerity of any of the figureheads of any of the world religions that we're talking about in
Yeah.
terms of them thinking that they're gonna force God to bring back. I don't care if it's the Moshiach or the second coming of Jesus, or if it's the Imam Mahdi in Islam. Who I saw this interview with. He's an apologetics Christian apologist, David Wood. Some ways he's more an anti-Islam apologist than a. I mean, he focuses most of his apologetics against Islam, Christianity, in opposition to Islam. And so he has a lot of former Muslims that have converted to Christianity on, and he had one guy on that had said something to the effect of that the mullahs in Iran, they basically have a same similar idea about bringing back the Imam Mahdi. So that's the last Imam. It's a similar idea in their eschatology that in the end times, that instead of the Moshiach, the Messiah, or the Jewish Messiah, or instead of the second coming of Jesus, although Jesus is involved in their eschatology in a different way, but there will be an Imam Mahdi, the last Imam. It's like the equivalent of that, right? And they think that according to this guy, and I can't remember his name, I wish I could, but he says that they believe that by escalating the conflict in Palestine, that they'll get a similar, except that they'll get their guy in instead. And so I think that anybody from any one of those faiths that thinks that they could force God's hand in line with when they want it during their time, on their terms, and on their time. They can't be a pious way to follow any religion or God, right? And so what I really think is that I think that the people that are really throwing gasoline on the fire in each one of those camps is basically, as I just showed you a little window into it, the New Age, the Gnostic infiltration into the Christians through in that CMP block, and it's more than that. I could go on and on, but I think what they all believe is that they're going to bring back what the New Agers they call Maitreya, right? He's the real, final God man or whatever, ascended master, right? It's not he is the second coming of Christ. He's the fifth Buddha. He's the Moshiach. He's the Imam. It's Maitreya. It's their New Age, who to them is it's Lucifer. It's the order out of chaos thing, potentially. I've never wanted to be wrong about something so bad in my life, but if I'm right, I think that's how and why that global conflict is devastating and unlike anything before it. I still think they intended to be limited enough to where they can reimagine the world on the out of the ashes.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I have a few more questions. First off, do we need to talk about, in light of how you framed it, just around the conflict in what's going on in Israel and Palestine? What people are worrying about is a regional war that will get bigger, and that's what you are saying is coming with the Trump victory. Um, is there any reason for us to talk about the other parts of these conflicts, like what's taking place in Ukraine? Because I think you see the same thing happening through there, but I imagine it. Is there a reason to talk about that conflict in your mind? I mean, I know you're worried about it, or it's an area that you also see as possibly being escalated. Does that, in talking about that conflict, does it add anything to what you're describing here?
It kind of complicates my ability to make sense of the region we already discussed. So a lot of the Christian nationalist types, the based red pill crowd, whatever you want to call it, the people that are still thinking Trump's gonna save the day or something. a lot of them like Russia.
Yeah.
Because and Russia has Putin has kind of not been very friendly to a lot of the woke stuff, and has at least genuflected towards the Orthodox Church, and has at least rhetorically touted Christian values and Russia's return to Christian values and all that. And then there's this idea that Trump, well, the whole time, even when he was running against Hillary, he's like, well, we should get along with Russia, and then and it didn't escalate things. Although I would say that if you think about the movie made with NATO, people are like, oh, see, he wasn't letting them push him around and here and there. He's like, yeah, but if you think about it, he basically made him stronger, because he basically said, pay your fair share. Now, if he promises, if he runs on, I'm not, I'm going to calm things down there. This is what I would guess. If the rest of what I'm saying is accurate, and that regional war is supposed to spill over into the one up in, which is not that far, by the way, right? Right, the Black Sea, right? It's a hop, skip, and a jump from the Middle East to the Balkans, and so that's where those regions come together. It's literally right there, right? I mean, pretty much, right? So I would guess that if stuff kicks off in the Middle East, I would guess that that means Iran gets involved. That means China takes Iran's back. That means Russia takes Iran's back, right? That means we're not cool with Russia at that point. So what does that do with Trump's situation there? And how does right, like, how does he? I would guess that the smoothest way to make that happen would be if something between now and the election happen. Biden administration does something to basically escalate the situation in Ukraine, where so when Trump gets in, he can go, oh well, I would have loved to have made peace with Putin, but Biden, this is what every president does for blame the dude before him for 4 years. But I told you, I don't know how much anybody pays attention to it. You don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but there's in Moldova, where I'm supposed to go next month. This Ukraine thing could turn into a Moldova thing real soon.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the thing that really creates a quagmire there. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, I will just say that I do believe that there are people who I've listened to who are critical of what the U.S. involvement in the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine, and they call it out as literally the United States fighting Russia and willing to fight Russia to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, as well as the U.S. putting as much weapons as they can into the hands of those Ukrainians to die and to kill Russians if they possibly can. So people who've been critical of that across the board, most of them have welcomed a Trump presidency as some sort of potential barrier or break on the war expanding and escalating. And I don't believe that. I actually believe that, despite the fact that Trump at one point had said, "Oh, I can end this war in a day," the language of late has been, NATO has to do its part, like you said before. And I find that very convenient that Trump is talking about NATO having to do its part. At the same time, Macron is making inroads and has made headway on getting Europe and NATO to talk about putting troops directly on the ground in Western Ukraine, and actually talk about an actual response that they might have to have if Russia takes Odessa, which seals off the Black Sea from the West and from NATO and from Ukraine if they do that. So I actually believe a Trump presidency, for different reasons than you. I don't see and I don't see the same end point. But I do see a Trump presidency being very effective for turning people who have said they expressed opposition to any version of these wars into either getting them to support these wars or giving it kind of support because now their guy is pushing it, or to get them to at least be quiet about it, not fight against it, and essentially give the U.S. ruling class a freer hand to do what it needs to do in both those regions. I think Trump is the better person for that, is a more fit vessel for taming any U.S. opposition that will be there. Not that there won't be that opposition, but I do believe that he is a better vessel for that than Biden. And so I do see the likelihood of war escalating. I see it escalating whether whoever's president, but I can see how they get there with Trump.
Well, and
Um,
you just made me think. This is the day where you get to record me thinking out loud over and over again. So I guess I could see. So I could also see how, let's say, so Trump kicks off. So he uses this Christian nationalist base to get him, energize him, get him voted in. In the meantime, they build up this anti-Semitism narrative around Christian nationalism. Then when he goes in to kick off the war, and he comes in with his new age, version of Christian nationalism with his CNP backing, and he comes up with like a Christian nationalist cancel culture. He could go after both basically everybody on the left and the Christian base that got him in by calling them anti-Semites, and using the terror laws to go, using the J6 national terror laws to go after them and BLMers and everybody on the left. And that would be the one where you could kick off the war and you could crack down on the broadest sectors of, we talked about this populist movement. He would be perfect one to crack down. You can crack down on everybody under him, basically.
right,
Under that veneer.
right. Now, this I almost think this sounds like a rhetorical question, but it's not. First off, you voted for Trump as a 2016 lesser evil. At that time, what I don't know if this is going to make you. What would make you, given what you're describing, have you ever considered, quote, voting for Biden as the lesser evil?
Nah.
Okay. Can you say anything about why?
When I voted for him, I didn't vote for him just like lesser of two evils. It wasn't so much lesser of two evils. Like I typically before that I would vote libertarian. I didn't like what Gary Johnson was saying that year. Trump sounded more like a libertarian than Gary Johnson did that year. And then what's her face?
Jill Stein.
Jill Stein said that he was less of a threat than Hillary. So you had the Green Party candidate promoting this guy who actually had a chance to win, who said the conspiracy theory stuff out loud, and he was, nobody'd said that before. Like, it wasn't just that he was lesser of two evils.
I
Like,
see.
he'd said a lot of radical stuff that no one had said. Talked about getting us out of the NAFTA and the TPP and all these types of trade agreements. He talked about investigating 9/11. At the time, he was talking about investigating adverse effects of vaccines. And I couldn't pin, he had said a lot of stuff that people were going after him. I was like, oh man, they really don't like him, and then the Hillary emails came out, and that freaked me out. So that was like oh man, we can't let that thing get in, right?
Yeah.
And it was all of that together was why I was like, all right,
Okay.
let's just vote for him. I didn't think he was going to win either. By the way,
Yeah.
I was like, let's just because if I vote for Gary Johnson, or Jill Stein, I probably would have voted. My next choice would have been Jill Stein. If I'd have voted for Jill Stein, it would have been like a principled vote, but it was like this guy who's ostensibly, because remember they didn't want him to win remember Reince Priebus, they were trying to say he couldn't be the nominee. They were trying to do him like they did Ron Paul all the years. I was like, oh, he's so braggadocious that Ron Paul was trying to be polite. He just called him out on it, got in. So I was like, this is ostensibly like a third party opportunity running through the Trump or through the Trump through the Trump party, which it is now, isn't it? Because what's her face is anyways. Those are all. It's all of that, and I'm telling you, dude. Listen. The day I don't know if it was minutes, maybe I don't even know if it was hours when he gets out on stage and says, "Oh, because he kept saying he's going to prosecute the Clintons. Oh, I don't want to prosecute. They're good people.
Yeah.
Oh, I literally snapped my finger. I said, they got me. I said, he got me. I immediately was like,
yeah,
because I knew enough about it, just him. He didn't seem like the most upstanding guy. But I will say, I dug and dug and dug. I couldn't find. I was like CFR Bilderberg. I couldn't pin him to any of them. Okay, well
Yeah.
that's okay. And they were like, oh, he was part of the Reform Party back in the day. Okay. And then I started looking into some of the people around him, like Roger Stone and these guys, and so there was that. That was like, so there was all kind of fishy red flag type stuff. But I entertained the possibility early on, and then the whole 4D chess thing. People would tell me that I would try to give the benefit of the doubt when I was having conversations with people. But at the end, I'm just like, dude, like after 4 years of 4D chess and you ended up with lockdowns and warp speed. No, dude, come on, man,
Yeah.
please don't. No.
Yep. Then because well, I'll say this first off, as much as you would say that, oh, your ideas might sound crazy, um, where we align is I do see dark clouds ahead, like very dark clouds, and all the people I listen to who think that there are exit ramps to some of these things, I don't think those exit ramps exist. At least in terms of the way in the way for me, the way I see these various capitalist centers, United States, China, and Russia operating, and then Europe, I don't see an off ramp for the collision that I see happening. And you don't see it in terms of collision. I think you see it more in terms of ultimately collusion, and using the threat of a collision to force to get people to accept this globalist plan, of one world government, one world religion that'll be combined. Um, that's not how what I see. I just see nuclear war, um, and uh, and I do see that coming, and I do see it gathering faster and faster, in my opinion. So in this regard, both you and I do see very worrying things coming. And I do believe that a Trump presidency, far from making it less likely, will be can very much fall into a situation that will allow the U.S. ruling class to escalate their plans to maintain hegemony, and go and be more bold in what I believe is they're losing the grips on hegemony, and that's when things get very dangerous in the world. When a nuclear power that has ruled the globe sees its fingers slipping from control, that's when I think things get dangerous. Um, so in that regard, like my brother, he just describes the world being led by demonic forces, but we're talking about the same world, because he sees what's coming as really very anti life, anti God, actually more anti God and anti Jesus, and then ultimately anti life and anti human because of that, and he opposes it. So I'll say that first, which is I don't think what you're saying is crazy. It's just not the framework that I come to, but I do believe we're looking at some of the same menacing things coming on the horizon, and things aren't good right now, and I think we both see a darker future. Um, I would say with a Biden presidency, but I believe Trump is going to win, and I believe it's going to lead to an escalation of difficulties for our side.
Oh, and I wanted to say too, I forgot to mention that. Okay, so just in line with some of these crazy theories I have, so part of what has to happen when they rebuild the temple is they have to sacrifice a perfect red heifer. It's a cow, red cow. Okay. Every hair on it has to be red. They can't find one on it that's not red. Supposedly they found one. So they have one that they could be ready to sacrifice.
Mm.
Okay. And in 2020, I think next year, there has been talk of potential reunion between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Some of them would refer to it as a false union. And then 2025 is what Alice Bailey said was going to be the beginning of the New World Order or the New Age. Alice Bailey's the one that she's the one that came up with the whole concept, New Age. Okay, she was a theosophist. I think I probably talked about her on other episodes. So next year, potentially, you have this Abraham Accords, bringing all the Abrahamic religions together. You're supposed to bring the two main branches of Christianity together in the same year that this New Age prophecy. And there's probably, I mean, we need to wrap up or whatever, but there's more than that. I'm sure there's stuff that I'm not even aware of. And so all I could say is that, man, it's a lot of tropes and coincidences just happen to be all coming together in the only time in history that's probably looked ever like this close to the book of Revelation in known recorded history, So, uh, at the very least, it certainly sets the table for them to play with those narratives to
And
to elicit whatever response they want from us when they do whatever they're going to do in the next 4 years.
then I guess the last question I would ask is, when you think about these things coming, because obviously you don't think the election is going to stop it, because the election is part of this plan. And I would actually, I don't think the election can stop anything. Like, the election will escalate, regardless of who gets voted. It will escalate the crises and the problems for workers, I would say. Do you do if I was to ask you, well, what do you think we could do, or what do you think one could do in the face of this and what's coming? Do you have an answer for that, or do you have an answer for yourself on that?
Well, I think most of the answer I could give to that, you could probably just go back to the last episode.
Yeah, I
We
thought you
did
were going to say that.
quite literally. I mean, and then honestly is a lot of why, I've been going and taking it more seriously because it's like, look,
Just to be clear, people who didn't were on the last
oh,
episode.
I'm sorry. Yeah, well, yeah, get right with God, I guess,
Yeah,
If you don't believe in God, I mean, get right with your loved ones and your conscience, and even Jesus says that's a close second, as far as, he says, the Pharisees ask him, what are the greatest commandment? He says, love God with all your heart. And there's a second one that is like this, and that is love your neighbor as yourself, So if we're talking World War III and Armageddon, I don't know that there's anything anybody can do other than get right with God and get right with your conscience. I mean, I honestly don't know what else to say. I mean,
I struggle with that question. So when I ask it of you, I don't have an answer myself. Um, I do believe humanity could stop it, but it will require something. It will require something to be built within among humans that it doesn't exist right now. Both doesn't exist institutionally as an alternative to what's happening, and it doesn't exist in people's hearts in terms of people believing in themselves and in each other, and believing in humanity as an alternative to what we are headed. I see each time what's happening with all these efficiencies is so-called efficiencies in technology, is we are being invited to give up a piece of ourselves, piece by piece by piece, and both materially and would say even spiritually, becoming kind of a cyborg. And as you give up yourself, I do believe we get farther and farther from the chance of making the kind of revolutionary change that I do believe people can make. But we're gonna have to turn from the course we're on pretty hard, and that is not going to happen through an election. An election is, to me, pressing your gas on accelerating us towards problems, because you are going into enemy territory and going right in and doing exactly what they want you to do, one way or another. So I do believe it could be stopped. I believe there's even the button pressing could be stopped. Although once they automate it on an AI mechanism, we run out of those sorts of things, and that is part of the NATO discussion here. That is part of the Russian discussion. The idea of the U.S. having nukes right on its border meant that Russia must automate its nuclear deterrent. And once you take it out of even human hands, it does become harder to stop. But I've heard those stories of submarine captains and Russian submarine captains, I think, who were told, like it was in the 80s or something, or 60s, maybe during the Bay of Pigs, who basically were told, you've got to let your nukes fly, and they didn't do it. And had they done it, then I think it would be very difficult for the world to have gone on, but at least for humans, in a normal way that we think of. I think maybe humans would have lived some, but I do think as we outsource decision making away from humans into this other mechanized robotic world, which is again our ruler's world, we again give up we continue to give up the possibility of controlling our own destiny. And so at some point, I do think it gets completely out of our hands. And once it goes that far, then I don't know what to say, other than all I'll say is, regardless of how, whether this could be stopped or not, I agree with you on getting right with your God. And I know that my conversations with my mom and with my family, people around me, are more informed with the sense of impending doom, but the urgency with which to speak plainly and from my heart with people I love. It's why I'm excited that you're going to join us at Columbia, because I think that's important, fellowship. And so regardless of whether we can stop that, I believe in doing that same thing that you're speaking of. Maybe that's not going to bring me to Orthodox Christianity, but the same sense of urgency and even intent to be true to myself and be true to the people who matter to me.
And I mean, and look, even let's say, like, even if we dodged all of it, turned the whole thing around, like all that stuff would still be on the table, and all that stuff being like not taking stuff for granted.
Exactly.
I mean, like, because look, I mean, what else are you saving the world for if it's not for
Right.
that, right? And so it's sort of like, maybe just doing that is what saves the world, and right, and being distracted by what you think is the outcome, the survival outcome, right, or the more utopian outcome. Maybe it's just, I guess what I'm saying, it's not really you don't have to consider it like a cop out or a
No, it's
you know what I mean? Like it's as much of a victory regardless of the outcomes and
yeah.
regardless of the stakes, I guess is what I'm saying. It's the most important thing regardless. Like, if we met in a different universe where we're, in a different timeline where we didn't have all this over us, that would still be the most important thing, and it would also be the thing that keeps the world from going into chaos, right? You
Mhm.
know what I mean?
Well, I agree. Um, well, maybe we should
But I'm
call it.
looking forward to seeing y'all in
Yes, good. We
gotta
got
make
to
it
get
back
you.
from Maldo.
Yeah, we got to get you home safe and sound from Moldova. Um, well, maybe we should call it a day on this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jake. This was fun. And I know that I threw some questions at you that you weren't necessarily thinking I was going to ask, but it was definitely fun to watch you ponder these things. And so I enjoyed this, and I'm hoping other people will get. Well, it's not great stuff we're talking about in terms of uplifting, but I actually think the part where we talked at the end about, well, here's what it means for you now. You just got to get right. Got to get right with your God, essentially. I think that's what this darkness should create greater clarity around, um, and people have to figure out how to do that. And I would invite people to do that, because I think, regardless, like you said, whether we live in a dark world or a very world that's very loving and giving, I feel like that is the most enriching way to go into life, because it's finite, you know. Um, so, all right. So that's it. Thank you, Jake. And next week, Eduardo and Kenny or Hema will be joining us. again, and possibly you, Jake, if you want to talk about, we're going to be talking about lavender and AI targeting Hamas and Palestinians and what that means. But that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. Post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast there and connect with us. If you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Bitchute, Odysee, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. If you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard here or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. With that, my name is Andy, and Jake, thank you very much, and wish everyone a great week.